What if history isn't just a chaotic string of random events? Great leaders here, unpredictable wars there. What if, hiding beneath all that noise, there are powerful, almost hidden patterns, actual rules that govern how civilizations rise and fall? And what if we could use science to read them?
Okay, so check this out. Back in 2010, when things felt, pretty calm, one scientist published that exact prediction in a major scientific journal. A full decade before the turbulence of the 2020s really kicked off, he saw it coming. And he didn't use a crystal ball. He used data.
And that really is the big question, right? This wasn't just some lucky guess or a vague prophecy. It was the output of a scientific model. So how on earth could someone use math and data to forecast something as messy and human as social upheaval on a massive scale? Well, let's dive in.
To get to the bottom of this, we first have to meet the man behind the prediction. His name is Peter Turchin, and he is definitely not your typical historian. In fact, his journey to understanding our history started in a completely different field.
Turchin is the pioneer of a new field he named Cliodynamics. And the core idea here is, honestly, revolutionary. It's treating history itself as a science. So instead of just telling stories about what happened in the past, Cliodynamics is all about searching for general laws, the mathematical principles that might explain why empires have their moment in the sun and then inevitably fall.
And his inspiration came from a pretty unlikely place. Turchin actually started his career as a biologist, studying the population cycles of forest insects, things like why their populations would suddenly boom and then bust. He was using math to model all of it. Then, right around the year 2000, he had this big thought. What if he applied those same tools to a much, much more complex species? Us.
Okay, so if history really does have these predictable cycles, what's driving them? Well, according to Turchin's model, there is one central, incredibly powerful engine of instability that just keeps showing up again and again and again throughout history. And that crucial concept is something he calls elite overproduction. Think of it this way. Imagine a society suddenly has, say, 1,000 super qualified, super ambitious people all fighting for just 10 top jobs. So what happens to the other 990? Well, they don't just pack up and go home. They get frustrated, they get angry, and eventually they start looking for ways to burn the whole system down.
And this process, it builds in a really logical sequence. First, you get this surplus of aspiring elites. Then, their ambitions get blocked because there just aren't enough seats at the table. This is what leads to the creation of counter-elites. These are people who have the skills and the resources to lead, but now they want to tear down the establishment. And finally, these counter-elites tap into all the general unhappiness in the population, and that's when you get widespread social turmoil.
And look, this isn't just some theory he cooked up to explain today. Turchin and his team went through mountains of historical data and found this exact same pattern playing out over and over in totally different cultures and time periods.
I mean, you see this everywhere once you start looking. Take 15th century England. A long period of peace was ironically the problem. See, warfare was the main career path for aristocratic sons. Without any wars to fight, you suddenly had this huge surplus of trained, ambitious nobles with nothing to do. The result? They turned on each other in the Wars of the Roses. Fast forward 4 centuries to China. The imperial exam system, the only real way to get power, was producing way too many scholars for the tiny number of government jobs. And all those frustrated candidates who failed, they helped lead the absolutely catastrophic Taiping Rebellion.
And the stakes here are just incredibly high. This isn't some abstract academic exercise. That single conflict, the Taiping Rebellion, fueled by this exact dynamic of elite overproduction, led to the deaths of more than 20 million people. It just goes to show how devastating these structural pressures can be when they finally explode.
Which, of course, brings us right back to today. In a lot of modern societies, the number of university degrees has absolutely skyrocketed. We've created this huge pool of educated, ambitious people. The problem? The number of truly elite positions, in government, top companies, culture, it hasn't grown anywhere near as fast. And that widening gap, well, that's the modern engine of elite overproduction.
Now, to be clear, it's not just about the elites. Turchin's model is actually more complex. It tracks several key things to sort of take a society's temperature. It looks at population trends, the level of inequality, the government's basic ability to function, and just the general well-being of the population. When a bunch of these indicators start flashing red at the same time, that's when the model signals a high chance of instability.
But it is so crucial to understand this. Turchin's work is not about predicting the future with 100% certainty. It's not fortune-telling. A better way to think about it is like a weather forecast for society.
So the goal isn't to say this specific event will happen on this specific day. No way! Instead, what Cliodynamics does is identify the buildup of these deep structural pressures that make some kind of crisis much more likely to happen. It's all about diagnosing a society's vulnerability, not predicting its exact fate.
And this right here is the most important takeaway. Collapse is not inevitable. History actually gives us examples of societies that felt these exact same pressures building up and managed to find an off-ramp. During the Progressive Era in the US, for instance, major reforms tackled inequality and corruption. That released the pressure valve and it prevented a much bigger crisis. These societies chose reform instead of revolution.
Which brings us to the final, critical question that this whole idea forces us to ask ourselves. The data suggests that the deep structural pressures for instability are here, right now, just as they have been at other turning points in history. And history shows us there are two paths forward. One leads to escalating crisis, the other to proactive reform. So, the question is, which path are we on today?